Professor Pamela Perlich is the Director of Demographic Research at the Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah, where she also serves as an adjunct professor in the Geography Department and in City and Metropolitan Planning. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Tulsa and her PhD in economics from the University of Utah. In her role as Director of Demographic Research, she leads the Demography Utah team. In this role, she and her team are responsible for developing and producing population estimates and projections, neighborhood indicators, and demographic analyses focusing on Utah. Formerly, she worked as a senior research economist with the Bureau of Economic and Business Research. Prior to joining the Bureau, she worked in the Utah Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, concentrating on long-run economic and demographic projections. She has researched, published, and taught on a wide range of topics over the course of her career. She's received awards for teaching, publication, and public service. Her work in the community includes frequent speaking engagements for civic, education, governmental, corporate, and professional organizations. She often serves as a resource to the press, providing the Utah context for broader events. Please join me in welcoming Pamela Perlich.
How terrific to be with you here today. Can you hear me okay? Let me just take in all your beautiful faces. Thank you for inviting me to your campus, and it's terrific to spend time with you today. I have a big task, and that is to give you sort of a 50,000-foot view of Utah's current demography and how that connects to the past and the trajectory into the future and the drivers of that change. Now, we understand that here in Utah and also in the nation that we're participants in, but also witnesses to a great economic and demographic and cultural transformation, and that transformation is really based in our connections to the outside world through markets, through technology, and through movements of people. One of the things that we understand about Utah and its future is that for the foreseeable future, change is really our constant companion. And wouldn't you know, this is going to decide to be, there we go, growth is going to be our constant companion. If we look back in time at the Intermountain States in the early part of the 20th century, we can see that all of them were sort of little bitty places out in the middle of nowhere with about 500,000 people. Colorado is a little bit different as it's connected to the eastern U.S. rather than westwardly. And who could have imagined in the mere span of 60 years that we would see Arizona surpass 6 million, Colorado surpass 5, Nevada approach 3. We passed 3 million people in 2015, and meanwhile, Wyoming, 500,000 people. But we're in a region of growth, and that region of growth has a lot to do with our connection to the global economy. So these are the million markers for Utah. This just to give you an idea of what a small place we are. We did not reach 1 million people until 1966. That's really very recently. We hit our second million in 95, our third million in 2015, and you can see that we expect to hit 4 and 5 million and approach 6 million in 50 years from now. It's not a question of if the growth will occur, but when the growth will occur. And of course, our actions today impact how that growth occurs, how it unfolds, whether it unfolds, and where it occurs. Urbanization is another theme that we understand about Utah and change going forward. So growth and change. We're not talking about the old Utah expanding and becoming the same thing, just in a larger version. We're fundamentally different as we've become much, much more urbanized as a state. We look at the Wasatch Front area, the 4-county Wasatch Front area, and the surrounding ring counties. And we see that this emerges within half a century as a metropolitan area of about 3.3 million people. That's about the size of the Seattle-Tacoma area. And whereas in the past we've seen a separation really of the Salt Lake County growth dynamic and the Utah County growth dynamic and characteristics, we see that as time goes on, that those two areas really merge together and expand into one large megalopolis, one large metropolitan area. And so that growth pushes out into the ring counties, but also really is dominant as the growth trajectory shifts south into Utah County. But this is a very, very long trend as Utah and the West in general, and actually just the U.S., has become increasingly urbanized. That's where the growth has occurred. And in so many rural counties, there's just not sufficient economic and educational opportunity. And so it's a very long-term pattern where youth come of age and then move to urban areas from rural areas, and the state just becomes more and more and more urbanized. We are among the most urbanized states in the nation. And if you look at the populations that are projected for 50 years from now, you can see that Utah County approaches the size of Salt Lake County. Certainly Salt Lake County continues to grow, but Utah County then reaches 1.6 million people, whereas Salt Lake County is at about 1.7 million. So the growth trajectory and dynamic for the state is really pushing further and further south. And part of the reason for that is the price of land and the amount of land that's been developed. As land prices become more expensive in Salt Lake County, then the trajectory for growth keeps going further and further south, right into Utah County. There's also urban infill types of development occurring much more in Salt Lake County. So you're seeing many more sort of high-rise multifamily rental units or even owner units, whereas the kind of development that's pushing into Utah County and southern Salt Lake County is much more of a suburban type development where people have houses and yards and so forth. And a lot of that is driven by the availability and the economics of land development. So you can see the absolute change in population that we're looking at. And by the way, Washington County surpasses 500,000 people. If you spend time down in the St. George area, to think about that population tripling, where are those folks going to live? How is that county going to develop? What kinds of decisions will planners make and local officials make and citizens make to be sure that that growth is done in a way that preserves quality of life, air quality, adequate transportation, affordable housing, all of the rest. But we can see that Utah County then is expected to add 1 million people. That's massive. And not sure that people have really gotten their heads around what that means for the county. And again, it's not the same old Utah that's just being supersized here. It's a place of change. And so we see much more diversity, many more different household sizes, many more diverse types of households of people living together, and people moving in from the outside. So it's not your grandmother's Utah or Utah County. You can see the percentage changes by county, and you can see that the ring counties here, Juab County, Wasatch County, of course, not so much Summit County, but that growth trajectory from Utah County then pushes into adjacent counties as the urban area spatially expands into previously undeveloped areas. So critical lands and critical land preservation are extraordinarily important to be attentive to during this period of development. One thing we know is if we don't plan the development, that the developers will. So as we think about what do we want the future to look like, what do we want our communities to be like, the growth is coming. Just is put together by Natalie Young, who works with me a former BYU graduate, valedictorian of the BYU Geography Department, and she put together these geographic centers of the population for Utah. And so it's kind of interesting to see the trajectory of that. And the way that this computation is done, it's an algorithm that if you take the state of Utah and consider it to be a completely flat plane and stack up, say, pennies or whatever you'd like, chips, equally weighted chips, representing one person in the population where people live, it would be the point at which if you put some like a sharp stick under it or a sharp piece of a metal pole under it, where the state would balance. So that's what this measure does. And you can see then how with the population growth further north and in the Salt Lake Valley, and then slowly and over time, that pull to the south and to the southwest. And so now that's about Camp Williams. That doesn't mean that's where most people live. It's just showing you that geographic pull, the development to the south. And so that's Utah County, and it's also Washington County, and that whole growth trajectory. Now, in the past, as you know, Utah famously has the highest fertility rate in the nation, although that fertility rate's been on a decline. And so in the past, and if you read the old economic development literature, very interesting, it was sometimes spoken, sometimes unspoken, but always implied that we wanted to develop enough jobs here in Utah so that the children in the large families would be able to have enough economic opportunity to stay. Well, we don't have that issue anymore. We've become a place of economic dynamism. Right now, we're among the most rapidly growing economies, and people have begun to move here on a really quite constant basis. Even as we had the Great Recession hit in 2007 and 8 and really hit bottom in 2010, we never had an exodus of people from the state. People stuck. And then on a really quite dependably then people continue, more people move here than move out because of the economic and educational opportunity. And so we can see that in what we call components of population change. If we go back to 1990, and this is really interesting if you go back further. If you go back further, you see the booms and busts in the Utah economy bring people in, people come and people go. But we have, this is net in-migration, gross in-migration minus gross out-migration. This is natural increase, births minus deaths. And over time, then you can see that more and more that the new people who move to the state contribute as much almost to the population growth as the people who are already here through births greater than deaths. Natural increase sort of stabilizes partly because the population is aging. So we did a decomposition. We built some pretty cool demographic projection models that also have an economic driver and all kinds of migration, including labor migration, missionary migration, retirement migration, migration for higher education. All of those are treated quite differently and uniquely for each county. Utah County was really hard to model. Let me just put that out there, especially because of its character, its unique character, and how that changes as it becomes subsumed into the larger urban area. So we did sort of a counterfactual, and we said, what would happen if from 1990 and on we have no migration? And let's see if we can estimate how much of Utah's population growth between 1990 and 2010 is attributable to the new people who came and to their kids. Okay, if you just take the birth and death records and estimate net migration, it comes out to be that we have about 35% net in migration, 65% natural increase. But remember who it is that's moving. It's young people who are moving, and I've noticed that it's young people who are having children too. And so one of the demographic dividends then you see of being a place of possibility and prosperity as we bring you young people to the state is that they contribute to the natural increase of the state. So on paper, this is what it looks like. By the way, that was not quite a 50-50 split between people who were born outside the U.S. and people who were born in the U.S. So it's a very international migration of people. So last 1 million people in Utah, fully 1/2 of them, 50-50, were because of the people who moved to the state and their children. So this leads to the changing demographic composition of the population, because the people who move here, whether they move from Okinawa or Oklahoma, they bring their cultures and their languages and their sensibilities and their practices and their intellectual heritages, their ethnicities, their roots. They bring those with them too. And so as they become part of the community, we become the part of the community, we all change together. If we just look at the composition of Utah's foreign-born population, immigrants, that great wave of immigration to the state in the 1990s particularly, and all the way up to the onset of the Great Recession, where there were many Latin Americans who came. A lot of that had to do with the composition of the economic growth at the time and the particular demands for labor that there were. What we've seen in this new expansion, when we had the Great Recession, the old economy went away in the same way, in so many ways, that the old demography sort of went away. There's a new system of economic growth and a new composition of the economy that's emerging. It's not the same old economy coming back and reconstituting itself. It's a new economy. It's a knowledge economy. So many things are changing. Right now, we have migration increasing again in the state. We estimate that we're in the high 20,000s. This is the highest net immigration this year that we've had since 2006. People are coming again, and they're coming from international source regions too. Right now, the main source region of international immigrants to Utah is Asia, not Latin America. And that's evidence also of the changing economic structure and economic opportunity. But the point is, this is a very multinational, multi-ethnic flow of people to Utah. And all of you who are in sociology and studying demography, the real key to understanding age structure and how that changes over time really is in the birth patterns. So if we look at the U.S. births, which are on this axis, and we follow them over time, and these are the Utah births, and you can follow them over time, we can see since in the post-World War II period that we had this great baby boom from 1946 through 64 nationally. This was an acceleration of fertility rates, where the fertility rate of women outside of Utah came to approach that of what it was already in Utah. Here's the baby bust, here's the echo boom, and you'll note that echo boom is lower than the original baby boom, and that's because fertility rates had come down. Now, demographers expected there would be another age wave out there that would be the children of this echo boom, and it would happen someplace out here, and it would be lower still, and so on. But what happened, in fact, is that in 2007, fertility rates actually accelerated and births hit a new historic peak. This was because of that in the 1980s and 90s, and crescendoing until we hit the Great Recession, we had a large international migration. And many of the populations who came had bigger families than the people who were already here. And so a lot of that acceleration in fertility, and certainly births and growth of the national population, and also the population here in Utah, was driven by this large wave of immigrants who came to Utah and to the nation. And similarly then, when the Great Recession hit, and what do you see out here? Births down, down, down. Births down, down, down. Oh, that can't be Utah. Births down, down, down. Yes, births down, down, down. And they're still going down. And we're in an economic expansion. Isn't that interesting? Something new going on, something different going on. Always a puzzle in the data to solve. I love those surprises. I love it when conventional wisdom is wrong and we have to figure it out. A change. Utah, we had conditions of a baby boom historically. Then we had a little break in the action here, and we had a large in-migration of people, an acceleration of fertility rates, a peak in the early 80s, and then a pause, and then a peak again that was coincident with the peak that you saw nationally, and then down, down, down. People, we are among the most rapidly growing economies in the nation, and births are going down. It went down again this year, and I am surprised because we know that people have been delaying having kids. We know that household formation has been delayed because of the carnage of the Great Recession. But honestly, I thought, given other data, that we would see an uptick in births in Utah in 2017. Hasn't happened. But you see how they both of them are tracking, but there's a difference. So here's just a zoom in of those parallel paths. We had a little bit of a different blip there in 2013, but that's the basic trend is down. This was, you've probably not seen this before, that we were able to put this together for our recent paper that me and my team did. Our paper was called Utah's Fertility Since the Great Recession, a New Normal or a Pregnant Pause? And we have concluded that this is really a new normal. People are having smaller families. And if we follow all the way back, you've probably not seen total fertility rates because we hadn't all the way back to 1920. This is the first time, and we used the Utah Population Database to put together the information. And so you can see that high fertility rates, this is the period of urbanization, and we know that this is the first great demographic transformation, right, or transition, if you'd want to call it that, where fertility rates come down and family sizes decline. 2 world wars and a Great Depression, those fertility rates come down. The post-World War II baby boom, the fertility rates go up. And now the second demographic transition, which is driving the fertility rates down. Some differences in Utah, but you can see now as Utah's become more integrated into the global economy, into the global community, that there's a parallel path. For the foreseeable future, Utah, of course, will continue to be the heart of the Mormon culture region. That's just a given. Culture is powerful. Culture, ethnicity matter and shape behavior and beliefs, and including the most personal of decision, which is where and how many children shall we have. And so we don't foresee in our projections a day where the fertility rate falls in Utah below replacement, but we don't see a day where it returns to a common family size being 4, 5, 6 children, that becomes increasingly a rare phenomenon in Utah. That's a big deal. Well, if we've had declines in births for the last 9 years here in Utah, obviously that's going to impact the number of, there's going to be age waves that come through. So what does that mean? If you're 9 years old, you're probably in 3rd grade. And so the 3rd grade class is smaller than the 2nd grade class, which is smaller than the kindergarten class, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's a lot of what demography is, counting births, right? And so as you see how that age wave works its way through, we actually have a period of time out here in our projections where we have very slow growth rate of school-age population. That's not the case, though, in Utah County, because where there is growth occurring, it's really being piled up in Utah County. So if you look at the Alpine and Nebo school districts, they're at absolutely the epicenter of school-age population. They will have a boom, whereas the rest of the state will have a, wow, not much growth here. Now, I think one of the really big challenges we face is communicating to state leaders that we need to support and manage growth in the areas where it's occurring, even if at a state level that growth is not so robust. How do we do that? That's an interesting question. I think we need to look at some policy changes. Well, everything we've talked about so far is looking at an average for the whole entire state. And you know, and I know, that there is no average person. Every one of us is very different. And life does not happen in averages. And you know, you can't ask someone to come for an average or a median or a mode to have a conversation with you, because they don't exist. In fact, they hide the great diversity that really explains our lived existence. And so, for example, if we look at the percent, this is in Salt Lake County. We did a study for Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County, so I brought this data for you to see, just to the north. So we see where are the households with 5 or more people. And if we're looking just at a city level, then West Valley City City and Kearns show up. Those are ethnic enclaves, immigrant gateway areas. And this is, of course, a Mormon enclave in the southern part of the county. But what happens if we zoom into the neighborhood level? All of a sudden, here in Salt Lake City, wow, we see that the western part of Salt Lake City is also an immigrant gathering area and has large ethnic enclaves and large household sizes. Meanwhile, over here on the East Bench, we have Maine and Vermont. Old, aging, white neighborhoods. So you really need to get to the neighborhood level to understand what's going on. Similarly with minorities, we have minority-majority neighborhoods on the western part of Salt Lake City. That E3 over there is the University of Utah. Here's a percent of families below poverty level. You really need to zoom in to the neighborhood level to understand what are the opportunities that people have in their neighborhoods. This is out of the Department of Health data, asking out of the survey that they do, and they ask people, how do you feel? How's your health? So if you're over here in Glendale, about a third of the population says, you know, I'm just not feeling that great. If you're up here on the East Bench, this is a very, very affluent neighborhood. Most everybody's doing pretty well. They're feeling pretty good. And the single measure, health measure, that really encapsulates and summarizes life possibilities for people is life expectancy at birth. So over here in this ethnic enclave, many new Americans in this community, many low-income people in this community, a lot families and youth. Life expectancy is a full 10 years less than it is in the foothill area of Salt Lake County, which is very affluent, very white, and have access to good health care, good transportation, good employment, good economic opportunity. And so, you know, if you plan to the average or to the region without considering these neighborhood outcomes, this is why I'm so keen on getting back to building the neighborhood indicator system, so we can set goals as communities and really track, is everybody moving, progressing together? And if we have areas that aren't, what do we need to do to make sure we open up those paths of opportunity for those folks? So really, neighborhoods is where we need to be thinking in as well as regional levels. Well, then there's the aging of the population. Oh, and my goodness, I'm right there with them. Who could have? I can't imagine how quickly the last 30 years have gone. I moved to Utah in 1986. Bam, 30 years have passed. Enjoy your youth. Really, enjoy your youth. The place is getting older. So not only are people having fewer families, but fewer kids in their families, they're also living longer. And you put those two things together, and what we find is that Utah goes in 2015 from having 1 in 10 in its population over the age of 65. Within a span of 50 years, that proportion doubles. So 1 in 5 of the population, 65 years or older. That's massive. That's an incredible transformation. We go from about 350 centenarians, and my neighbor Edith Reed just became a centenarian. I found out she's a 5th generation Mormon family here, to over 6,000 people who are centenarians. I mean, we're talking about a dramatic shift in the population structure. This is school-age population. That percentage stabilizes and declines. So the fastest growing population shares and groups are in the older groups. Now we summarize age structure with a measure called the dependency ratio, which is really just age structure. We define here, just for this purpose of illustrating age structure changes, working age population, prime working age population goes from 18 up to 65. We characterize youth as those who are less than 18. We characterize elders as those that are 65 years and older. And so what this measure shows you is, if you rewind back to 1970, when baby boomers were still kids, there were 61.3 people under the age of 18 and 17.7, 65 years and older, per 100 working age people. A lot of kids. So then the baby boomers joined the age group of prime working age, and these numbers came down. And now baby boomers are aging, and they're hopping up in this gray box right here and driving growth of the aging of the population. And so what you end up with in 2060 is almost at the same dependency ratio as you had in 2060, almost the same dependency ratio that you had back in 1970. It's just that it's being driven by many more elders. This is significant. And we have a lot of generational stuff to work out, intergenerational transfers to work out. This is what it looks like in Utah. Again, let me go back so you can see the differences. And draw your eyes to the far right, US, Utah. So we end up with a higher dependency ratio in general, a slightly higher share in the young group and a slightly lower share in the older groups, but the basic age structure trend is there. And importantly, that youth component of the population stabilizes. We're not looking at going back to this extremely large number of youth dependents. We have the youngest median age in the nation. But it's rising. And the share of school-age population stabilizes, doesn't grow. Many of the folks who are in positions of power and authority haven't gotten this message yet, don't understand this. We summarize this in an age population pyramid. How many of you have seen population pyramids before? Oh, wow, awesome. Okay, so this is males on this side, this is females over here, and these are single years of age. This is the first time you've had the opportunity to see the Utah population projected up to top-coded at 100. All previous models had been top-coded at 85. And it was so important for us to get those older age groups right because of the aging of the population. What this shows, this is historic data from 1960, and it was top-coded in 85 and older. We don't have single-year data available. So what does it show? It shows a really fat bottom down here, right? Lots of kids and not so many old folks. Here we are in the current period, and we've been lucky enough to coordinate with a lot of people to get all kinds of data, including details on age and sex composition of the missionary corps, and I say corps, I don't know, missionary teams that go out. As they left, we were able to see them in the data, and we got actual data. So we were able to actually, this is really what the 2015 population looks like. There's the big missionary cave for men, right? And now you see one for women. And the thing's getting fatter. Baby boomers are getting older. This is the age distribution projected then for 2065. Still a missionary cave for women and for men. So we go from the shape of a Christmas tree to a beehive. The place really changes. This is fundamental difference. And so people, planners, policy people, all of us, we need to think a little ways down the road as to what does this mean. I just thought I'd show you this Utah County pyramid. If you go back a couple of decennial censuses, you get less population up here, and these wings, these are college age. This is you guys, right? BYU, UVU. And these are kids. And by the way, when you model college counties, it's really important that when these young adults move off, their kids go with them. You guys do take your kids with you when you leave. It's important, or you overproject school-age population. So this has begun to fill in, but you can still really see the dominance of universities, although it's fading a bit. Here's what we think or project the population pyramid looks like in 2065. You've still got dominance of young adults. You've still got the fat bottom of the high fertility rate and college folks having kids. But you see, it comes to much more resemble the state because this county is being subsumed into a larger metropolitan area. It becomes more like Salt Lake County, as there are more multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual. This is an international, global flow of people and ideas and possibilities. So we're really following national trends, and I'm going to go through this very quickly. We still have the highest fertility rate in the nation, but folks, that's an historic low, 2.29 children per woman. And many people simply will not believe the data, and I just keep showing, no, births are not going down, fertility's not that low. Yes, they are. Yes, it is. And again, we did some research as to why largest household size in the nation, but going down, although what we've seen in more recent data is that persons per household is going up. Now, this is very intriguing. If people are having fewer kids, if they're waiting till later to get married and have kids, or maybe never having kids at all, if the population of aging households are smaller, why are we seeing persons per household going up? And it's going up pretty pervasively throughout Utah. When I first started seeing this in the data in 2010, 11, 12, I thought, well, this is a recession. People are doubling up, right? But then the economy started really booming again, and it's continued. And it's pervasive nationally, too. Something else going on. The share of households with people 65 years and older is going up. Is grandma moving back, or is grandma inviting people to move back in with her? Or is grandma moving in with the kids and taking care of the kids because of the lack of affordable, available daycare? Are the new multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnic enclaves of people much more likely to be multi-generational? Are people just simply living together in single structures because they want to be close to their jobs and they can't afford or find housing close to where they want to work, and they don't want cars? I mean, there's a big conversation in Salt Lake right now about what are called mother-in-law apartments. I mean, they're called that for a reason. People used to reconstitute. You know, it was just this brief period of time, if you have a very long-run view of history, where people had the affluence and the interest in forming and maintaining independent households way into their old years. We see more households of unrelated people living together. We see more families where brothers, sisters bring their families back together under the same roof. This has something to do with something different. We're watching, when the first few years of the data came out, I was, okay, it's a little blip. 3 years of data is not a trend. But we're now on year 7 of seeing this increase in persons per household. Something different going on, something interesting, new forms of households. Median age, we're the youngest in the nation, but we're getting older. Minority shares of the population, we're lower than the nation, but we're increasing. Female age at first marriage, getting older. We're asking women to go to school. We're asking women to have more education. We're asking women to go on missions. All these things are good. It's just they take time. And so this delays household formation, and we know if people start later, if they say, maybe I wanted to have 3 kids to begin with, but geez, now I'm 30, 2 sounds a little better. So generally, delayed fertility leads to smaller family sizes. And where we've seen the largest declines nationally in fertility rates is among teenage women, and hallelujah, right? So that's a good thing. So that's not going to rebound, I hope. Women in their young 20s, the fertility rates just collapsed. Women in their later 20s start having kids, but not at as great a rate as they used to. Women in their 30s, down a little bit. Later in their late 30s and 40s, up. But there are not very many women in those age groups having children. And you put that all together, and you've got smaller household sizes. But we see larger household sizes. It's interesting, isn't it? And here is the iconic Utah family that everybody says, oh yeah, everybody is this. I'm just going to say also white families, opposite sex couple, white families with kids. Right now in Utah, opposite sex married couples of all backgrounds are 30% of households. So that means the great majority of households are not what you hold in your head as being everybody in Utah. This is not everybody in Utah. This was everybody in Utah during the post-World War II baby boom. It was everybody in the U.S. kind of during the post-World War II baby boom, but it's not any longer. In Utah, that was delayed in its transition. We have a great generational shift too now. Millennials have surpassed baby boomers in size. And we also have a great multi-ethnic population emerging in our youth. These are the kids of immigrants. The fastest growing population group by the race ethnic categories that the Census Bureau employs are heritage kids in Utah, faster than white kids, faster than any other group. And so these are the kids of immigrants, and if you look at the fall survey data, school data is awesome data, demographers, for all kinds of information. Last fall, the fall survey, kids in Utah said, I'm speaking this language at home. 129 languages spoken in the home of Utah school kids. And this year, an increase in the ACS data, we see an increase in the number of people who have non-English language skills spoken, non-English language spoken in home. So this is a great wave of diversity in our youth, and we see this in our minority data. Minority data didn't capture all of the diversity of our people, but it captures some of it. And we look at that by age, and here we are in the preschool age, 5-year age groups, top coded at 85 and older. And what this shows is 1 in 4 kids in Utah, preschoolers, is a minority kid, about 35% in Salt Lake County, about 49% nationally, 50% in Salt Lake City. And that's because in that west part of the city, that gateway community part of the city, about 75%, 3/4 of the kids are what we classify as minority. And then here, if you go to any public meeting where you've got a lot of elected officials, we're seeing now a generational shift there too, but still predominating numerically in the power structure are white men of this age group. And this is an age group that there are not many immigrants, not very many people of color, and there were different gender roles in those ages too. So over time, this is the beautiful thing about demography, that you just add the people that are coming in who happen to be young babies, who happen to be multi-ethnic, multilingual, multicultural, global, and then subtract the people who die. There'll be people like me, old white people. And so as we begin to fall off the top of that pyramid, then what we see as the immigrants have come and they age and have children is that minority-majority, which is a really odd terminology that's come from people of my generation, naming it baby boomers, become the norm. This is for the state of Utah, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And so, maybe 2 generations behind. This is Salt Lake County, maybe a generation and a half behind. Here's Salt Lake City. So, again, the geography is all important in looking at these changes. But that whole characterization of minorities is really missing the point, because what we have in the U.S. and in Utah is the emergence of this large multicultural youth. This was, I still take National Geographic. This was an awesome issue. Every one of these people has such a fascinating story, and aren't they beautiful? They all are mixed heritage kids. This woman really has a commanding presence, doesn't she? Isn't she beautiful? Hosanna Marshall, 32, New York, New York. Self-ID'd African American, Native American, white, and Jewish. The census box she checked was black. And I have news for you. The 2020 census that's about to occur, it looks like this will be the first census since 1790 where we don't use the word race. We'll be asking something basically, what is your heritage? And there'll be a down box, and I'll be able to say white, yes, but German, and a little bit of English. And you all can claim whatever heritage explains all of your beautiful faces and all of your family histories. And that's an incredible thing. So I guess my message to you today is that Utah is really forever changed. We're becoming a different place economically, culturally, and demographically. We're becoming much more multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnic, and that those changes, they are irreversible. They are ongoing. They are cumulative. You're not putting the toothpaste back into the tube. Utah's not going back to what it was in 1950, either as an economy, a little bitty place out in the middle of nowhere, Not going back to that, and we're not going back either demographically. These changes are ongoing. They're part of the emergence of Utah as a global metropolitan place. And I think we're living in extraordinarily exciting and promising times, but also challenging, because what we see with these changes are that infrastructures of opportunity that have worked really well for people who look like me are not fitting all of the diverse populations and different circumstances that people are facing. And so, basically, we're incredibly affluent. We're not living at a time of either shortage or deprivation. We live at a time of great possibility and prosperity, but we also have a call to action, and that call to action is wherever we touch this world, wherever we build our networks, look for ways to connect to these changes, look for ways to address what older people see as intractable problems. They're not. There are solutions. There are intergenerational transfers. There are ways to design communities. There are more possibilities than my generation can imagine. So I pass the torch to the embrace of the new generation and welcome you as a partner in helping us figure out how we rise to these challenges and create this new Utah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So you showed a map of the counties of the state of Utah, and all of them had positive growth.
Some of them are very, very minimal.
But if you look at the trends, many of those counties are declining, aren't they? Pine County, Daggett, Carbon, and Emory. There's quite a few that are.
We're on a few year run of that, and of course those are very cyclical. They'll go through periods like Daggett County as a great example. It's boom and bust, up and down, up and down, up and down. We don't project cycles. We don't project resource cycles or business cycles.
The energy industry out there that would be causing some of that fluctuation.
Yes. Yeah. We don't project those because what that does is it muddles the signal of the demographic changes if we bring people in and out, in and out. And plus, we just are not going to project a recession. But if you kind of average that out, even in a place like Daggett County, there has been enough of an economic footing there and enough of a resource-based and a tourist-based economy, if you think about Flaming Gorge, that there continue to be people, when people die, people continue to move there and live there. It's just this very small outpost. It will never be growing gangbusters. And thankfully, that would kind of ruin Daggett County, wouldn't it? There are those rural areas will continue to be, and as they have been for many, many, many decades and over a century, people moving away. There's just not enough going on there. Net out migration, but then it seems to be that young people move back in, they have kids, there's just enough there to just keep it growing very, very slowly, or kind of a status quo.
So what I'm hearing is you believe that there will be positive growth in Emory County and some of the others, even though so I do a lot of work in rural Utah, as you know. You started me on some of this with the AOGs around the state of Utah.
Right.
I've stayed connected with them and continue to work with them. Some of them are afraid that their growth isn't going to come.
Right.
And how do we create some kind of economic stimulation? And so it becomes politically important for right now, because they were pushing for a change in some of the Bears Ears and things, but where they're hoping that they can get some natural resource extraction out there in these rural counties. They can have some growth. I guess this is a bad question, worded in a good way, I hope. Do you ever feel pressure to show growth in places that, in your heart, looking at the numbers, you just don't think there's going to be growth?
Oh, sure. And so that's why we really want the next phase of the work to be scenarios. So an awful lot of our migration is driven by what were the economic forecasts. And those economic forecasts take the national forecasts and basically maintain relative differences.
A shift share analysis.
Yeah, well, more or less, yeah, more or less. And so nationally, they don't ever show declines, even, I mean, in some of them. So, yeah, there's definitely a political element there, but a lot of it's coming from the economic driver of what we do. Now, what I'm being a proponent of right now is using our models and working with individual counties or regions or whoever is game for it and do some scenarios. What happens if? And then in that case, you know, Carbon and Emory County are not going to be, you know, boom areas. Are they going to collapse and be gone? We've seen even in Daggett County, even in places where we said, no, there's no real economic opportunity, somehow or the other, the population continues to increase. It'll go up, it'll go down, but over the long, long haul, this is just a very slow. But yeah, I mean, it may be a 10-year run, it may be a 20-year run on these cycles. And implicit in this work is this sort of honesty that we really don't know the economic future. And you think about a place like Utah County or Washington County, with those kinds of projections, what we're really saying is that we have a fundamental belief that the people and the decision makers in that area will be attendant to all the things that they need to be attendant to, and this growth will happen. But you know, you could also come up with a scenario where, you know, we allow a lot of industries in that pollute our water, that pollute our air, that quality of life becomes terrible, and people say, this is not the cool place I thought it was. You could imagine if you don't do planning at the point of the mountain, the congestion just becomes so bad that people are like, I'm not sitting in my car for 2 hours a day. I'm going to move to Boise. Well, eventually you'll sit 2 hours in your car there. But you see what I'm saying. So there are so many assumptions packed in. Washington County, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, what's packed into that scenario that we have for them is a belief that they will manage their water shortages, either through aggressive conservation or new supplies. You tell me. It's possible they won't. So, I mean, that's kind of the game. I mean, and it's not like these things are a done deal. The future is not given. The future's not okay, there it is. We're approaching it. We're creating it. So the political pressure, I think, in my work, I should say the tap dance, is that we're fundamentally optimistic here that these regions and these places will develop the kinds of policies and practices that lead to these results. Now, if they don't, they won't. So that's why I want to look at the different scenarios. I mean, what if we don't get a handle on the opioid crisis? What if we don't get a handle on the obesity crisis? What if we don't get a handle on all kinds of things? Life expectancy is not going to continue to go up, right?
Do you consider epidemiology in your forecast?
Oh, yeah.
You do. So I love your I'm sorry, I'm taking this other question where people can go. But your map of Salt Lake County, fantastic and fascinating. When you show the racial segregation in the county and the impact it has on outcomes, like expectancy and so forth, does that make decision makers, does it give pause? Is there a real consideration of whether this is a healthy way to mix our community, or do we want to have housing policies that might provide some affordable housing over on the east side and these kinds of things? Do you feel traction there, or is there just, oh, well, that's what they've been in the past? It'll always be?
It's a big depends. It depends. I think that there are large numbers of people who want to recognize and acknowledge that not everybody's got the same shot at life. Sure. How about if I went for pizza last night, because, you know, it's what you do before a big talk. You go have your comfort food, right? Yeah. And one of my former students who works as a planner for UTA works as a waitress in this pizza joint just because, you know, it's just fun for her. Her name's Allie, but she wears a name tag Fern. I don't know why, but anyway, she was telling me that with the new leadership at UTA, that they're beginning to address these issues of equity. Yeah. Because before, you know, they're planning bus lines and train, all of that around how to move the most people out of their cars and onto the tracks for air quality. And they're not thinking about, hey, there are a whole bunch of people who don't have cars. don't we want to think about where we have bus service for them so that they can get to work, right? So I think it's a generational shift where you're beginning to see people who have those kinds of sensibilities and understandings. It's just a question. I mean, in Salt Lake City, the person who's driving the mother-in-law apartments and the infill development and all of that in Salt Lake City is council person Derek Kitchen. So the older people represent the East Side. They're not cool with it. So I think there's also a lot of fear mongering. The people who appeal to the limbic brain, the fear, anger, and all of that, rather than hey, we've got these issues, we can figure them out. There's a lot of fear mongering around generational, people talking about generational warfare. I mean, it's to me disheartening because we have such capability. I mean, I'm fine with paying more taxes now to better resource young people, with the understanding that at some point I'm not going to be working anymore and I'm going to need a little help. And we're under-resourcing the next generation, my opinion. And then when it comes time for Social Security, I'm going to be doing pretty well. There's no reason for me to get the Social Security, they say, because I've been fortunate enough to save. So means testing we can solve Social Security, right? We can solve, there need not be a generational war, there need not be a cultural war, there need not be all of these divisions between people. So I think we need to, and I see it happening, and in the conversation with Allie Fern last night, she was saying that the current institutional structures don't allow them to do what they want to do, but they found a unique way through some grants and through a nonprofit channel that they can begin to develop these plans for new transit routes based on where people need to be, where people who don't have cars. I guess the point is the current institutional structures are just going to continue to be they're on survival mode, right? So they're going to look after the people in power in those institutions. And if we want to reorient, that big ship where it's going, the direction it's going, then all of us little tugboats, you just say, hey, that's not working. You're in your organization, I'm in mine. I know we haven't traditionally worked together, but look, if we do this new thing in this new way, we can get to that place together. And if we all do that with our little tugboats, then slowly, social change happens. It's institutional change. It's not showing up in the big narratives because the big narratives are prioritizing things like money rather than health outcomes. I mean, you all know this. So I'm fundamentally an optimist, and I don't think we're going to devolve into some sort of barbarian, civilization. I think we're going to figure the things out, but they're not going to come from some big global policy. They're going to come from us coming together and saying, okay, folks, let's roll our sleeves up. We got this. Let's figure out how we make it work. These little kids have high incidence of not having dental care. Yes, do you know that's the number one reason why kids miss school? Low-income kids, dental problems. Well, let's get community learning centers and put dentists there and get the little kids' teeth cleaned. I mean, is this hard? No, but you don't get it from looking at big old data sets. You get it from face-to-face is the place where we can win the race. I think, don't you? I mean,
is that original to you, or?
Yeah, I just made it up.
You're pulling my leg, or you did? Because you did. I'm quoting you on that now.
You can quote me on that.
Okay.
No, but I think it's the truth. But people are just all hung up on, it's all about big data. It's about having honest conversations with people. Let me tell you a quick story. So, the big wave of immigrants that came to Salt Lake's west side really overwhelmed the white teaching corps and the older woman teaching corps who had, the old Utah in mind. And they just didn't understand how to connect with the new families. And they're good people, but there's just a disconnect and no real understanding of how to break through. And in one of our west side schools, there were a big enclave of Somali families. And according to this principal of this elementary school, the Somali families, they came to all of the after-school stuff, they came to all the parents' stuff, all throughout the fall. The spring semester started and they quit coming. And there was a lot of disparagement about, see, those people, they don't value education, see, those people. And so a wise woman, her name is Rosie Hunter. She was running the University Neighborhood Partners, which is an institution at the University of Utah whose purpose it is to connect the university to our community, where we're up on a hill, we have a research park, there's a big highway in between us and all of these really cool, diverse, multicultural communities. So let's have a facility there, let's have a house there, let's build partnerships where those little kids from an early age start seeing, you're going to go to the university. Nobody in your family did, but we're going to get you here. Start working with people through their issues of access and opportunity. So Rosie, was talking to the principal, and this was in her area where she was working, which was Glendale. And she's like, have you talked to the families? Well, no, we haven't. So Rosie set up a meeting of the administration of that little school, and they went to the place, which of course was an apartment building where the family was living. And guess who shows up? Grandma and grandpa, auntie, uncles, it's a big community of people show up. And the conversation goes something like, well, my kids are actually in the school district that's on the other side of that school that would have put them across Redwood Road, which is basically a highway. And those little kids would have had to cross on foot on this big 3 lanes one way, 3 lanes. And the parents of these Somali kids were like, that is not happening. We're going to walk to this school that's a little over 2 miles away. We don't have a car. We have no transportation, but we're going to walk. It's about a little over 2 miles to walk. But you're going there so you don't have to cross this terrible highway on foot. Well, guess what? Winter came. It's dark. It's cold. They're not tracking 2.1 miles through the weather and in the dark to go to these evening programs. The school buses only will serve people within a 2-mile radius of the school. They were just outside. It was a transportation problem.
But they wouldn't have found that out had they not had the meeting.
Face to face is the place where we win the race.
They want every slide I do from now.
No, I'm just such a believer. I mean, people isolate people through our technology, and the data just simply did not show this. Just a common, basic courtesy of a conversation. They didn't have a way to get there. Yeah.
So I have 2 different related questions. So you talked a lot about this suburban, sprawl, areas like Saratoga and Herman and stuff. So do you see the trend continuing that way? And also, what are the local policy implications for zoning and things in already established areas in Utah County like Warren and Provo?
Why are you not a planner?
Yeah, why are you not a planner?
What's your major?
I'm an economics major.
Consider a double major with planning, seriously, because land economics and real estate economics and zoning and all of that are areas that we need to do a lot of work in. So the answer to your question is, of course, it depends.
Yeah.
But on enlightened people saying, let's take a bigger picture than just the tax base of our city. So, and consider a political connection too, because that's those planning what are they called? Planning commissions.
Planning commission, yeah.
And by the way, our current Utah legislature is just packed full of real estate developers. I mean, who wins no matter what when you've got development going on? Developers. And if we don't plan our future, they will. And they are. So we need to get a lot more proactive and have whole rooms full of someone like you asking these questions in all of these places.
Well, for example, in the city of Provo, there's a lot of controversy over low-income housing and allowing those in areas more wealthy. So, I guess it's all political, but how do you, get local response to those issues?
Relationship building, discussion, planning. building trust, making change.
Yeah.
Making change.
So you showed us that a lot of people coming to Utah are actually from different countries. What, in your opinion, are the three biggest drivers for that? Like what three?
Economic opportunity, I'll give you four. Economic opportunity, educational opportunity, refugees, and the sales force. So every year the LDS Church sends out large numbers of incredibly impressive young people, making connections globally, and a lot of those connections become lifelong connections and bring people back to Utah. So, it's a church that is, because almost all religions are welcoming and compassionate, and in this case, very into the nitty-gritty of community building in places where missionaries serve. So this just creates a global network and brings more people to Utah. Even if people don't convert, imagine the impact. I can only imagine the impact on my life if I'm picturing myself in, say, rural Mexico and had a group of missionaries come and really help me concretely in a lot of ways. Okay, well, maybe I'm not going to become LDS, but wow, if I'm moving to the U.S., I'm going to Utah. You know what I'm saying? So, but there are also big business connections that get made internationally through the LDS Church. Can you imagine what Utah would look like in the absence of the LDS Church?
The old desert.
Wyoming.
Yeah, maybe it looked like that. I used to say it looked like Boise, but Boise started to boom. But really, yeah. I mean, it's so fundamental. During the recession, this last great recession, there have been many recessions. There will be more. There have been financial crises. There have been hundreds of them. There will be more. But during the last one, that huge downtown development, $1 billion downtown development, it kept us rocking and rolling here in Utah. Everybody was pulling back. The LDS Church invested, not just a little bit, way doubled down downtown Salt Lake City. This institution, imagine Utah County without BYU. Boy, it would be a sad thing. So that's four. Okay.
We don't take a long time.
That's about all the time we have.
So you guys, we're in the Thomas Monson Center on South Temple, 411 South Temple. If you find yourself in Salt Lake City, want to hang out with some demographers, economists, statisticians, magicians, we're there. We'd love to have a visit from you. We're always looking for new talent. We're running interns through all the time. We do applied work. Our work is to serve the people of Utah. That's my audience. That's what I live for, is to serve the people of Utah. So come visit us. Feel welcome. And thank you for your warm welcome here today. Thank you.